he really would go through the contract stuff. He says that there's different types of contracts. All the contracts are based on New York State's penal code. Everything in the United States, his research said, was New York State penal code. And if you know their system and how to go through it, and you know Yahweh, so he'd call it Yahweh system. He says, you know those two things and how they interact. He goes, boy, there's nothing can stop you. And he says they're so accustomed to nothing happening in the spiritual realm or nobody praying against them or using a higher system that they don't know what hits them when you start to enforce those rules and regulation, or the weights and measures according to what they're doing. But I don't know how you feel about it, but it's pretty interesting cat this guy is.
Do you remember reading that moment in the Gospels where Christ is confronted by a bunch of Pharisees where they've brought a woman they accuse of adultery?
Yes.
And being a whore. And he listens, and do you remember what he does? He bends down and starts writing in the sand. Do you remember that part?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I remember my parents got an album by Johnny Cash when he was going through one of his Christian phases. He sort of interpreted that to Christ writing in the sand, liars, hypocrites, all that kind of stuff and that. But the Bible doesn't actually tell us what he was writing in the sand, but I know exactly what he was writing in the sand, because basically Christ was acting as a high priest right at that moment. And there's a law in Leviticus that when a husband brings an accusation against a wife for adultery and so on, and she claims innocent, and there are no witnesses, and this is key, where there are no witnesses, the high priest is then incumbent to write the accusation in the sand, then scoop up the sand and force the dust, and then put it into a drink and not force, but the woman then has to drink it. And depending on what her health is after that, whether she lives or dies, determine the result, which sounds all very magical and mystical, but what is actually happening there is that what Christ did was they were trying to entrap him with their various sort of systems and so on. And he began a process where he was appealing to the highest court there is. And those Pharisees that looked on, they suddenly realized what he was doing, and they backed out. They knew exactly that he was following a prescribed course of practices that a high priest would have to go through, and in so doing was evoking the highest celestial court that there was. And they backed out. That was their moment. If these people were truly, against Christ, that was their moment to accuse him of blasphemy. And that was their moment to call his bluff. They basically shat themselves, and they went away. It sounds like your friend is doing a similar thing, appealing to the high court. And every man, woman, child, widow, orphan, if they know how to do this, it can be done. You can appeal to the high court and send it before the court, and it might not be made manifest in this time, but at the time of resurrection, these are the sins that will be brought before the court. And these are the times also that you better be sure that you are not judging according to your own rules, that you are bringing this particular accusation into the court, that it's just and such. So for a lot of people, it's a strange moment, Christ doing that. Once you know the legal system and how it works from the Old Testament, once you've read through Deuteronomy and Leviticus and even parts of Numbers and Exodus, and you get a clear handle on that, you realize just how profoundly dedicated to the law Christ was, making a mockery of this idea that he came to do away with it. No, he came to fulfill it. And there wasn't a single action of his that was illegal according to that law. That was in effect at that time and is today. And it is actually my belief that the act of Christ's ascension, or his resurrection, and the subsequent events surrounding his resurrection, bespoke the act of being accepted as a high priest in the actual court of heaven, so that Christ, the human, actually became the first human representative able to manifest himself before God in the celestial court as it exists.
Wow.
And that is where he intercedes for us from that time till now and onwards. And that's where he basically governs and determines the course of events down through history. See, I believe very much in the historicist interpretation of Revelation and other prophetical books, in that Christ gave us a series of events spanning well over 2,000 years that would take place from his ascension through to his re-manifestation. And this is, people think Christ went off to literally another geographical area. They can call it heaven, but this idea that he's gone away, I don't believe that to be the case at all. I believe that Christ became invisible to this world, and that the book of Revelation should be read in its title as what it actually says. It says the revealing of Jesus Christ. In other words, the book of Revelation is the events and formula by which Christ will be once again revealed as existing in the world.
Wow.
You see what I'm saying?
Oh, it's beautiful.
It's a completely different thing. And, your friend, talking with the judges and all that kind of stuff, I'll be honest, Mark, I have long been looking at this idea that, you see, to me, the devil, the demons, however they exist, they're a defeated force. The only thing that's left to defeat is my own rebellion, both personally and, of course, on a national level. I believe it takes place. Yeah. But my own rebellion is the thing I am fighting against, because whatever the devil or demons manifest themselves off, they're a defeated entity, in terms of that. And it's my honest belief that the Christ is doing exactly what he said, ruling, has all authority over nations. And I have no doubt that his ability that he manifested after his resurrection to disappear, to walk through walls, to be only recognizable when people did the work of studying what the prophets, the road to Emmaus. Remember that particular incident? On the road to Emmaus, he walked with people who had known him. Yeah. After his resurrection, he walks with two men, a 30-mile journey. They're incredulous because he says, what's happened in Jerusalem? Don't you know Jesus Christ got executed, blah, blah, blah. And so Christ embarks upon telling them all that was written of Christ or of the Messiah from Moses through to all the prophets. And it's only when he's finished that and he's sitting down with them at the end of the journey that they look up and suddenly realize that they are in the presence of the risen Christ. Okay? He didn't change shape. He didn't whatever. It was the intellectual understanding that those people gained that gave them the spiritual vision to see who was sitting in front of them. And that is if you extrapolate it onto a massive scale, everything I talked about with the history is ritual for the Saturn death cult, there is a similar application in the sense that the human race, or the nation of Israel, whatever it is you want to call it, the Christianity, is walking the road of Emmaus through the generations, and will reach a point where they are sitting down and suddenly he will be amongst them. And, of course, in the original story, once they realized who he was, that's when he just disappeared. Now, I think that's a very real talent that he has, that ability. I have no doubt that he is standing over the shoulder of key players in world geopolitics, that he knows exactly what these guys are up to, and he knows exactly who he has to whisper in whatever way into whatever person's ear to basically fulfill Revelation as it comes through.
That's really strong. It's like and I'm going to bring them up here just for the reference sake. Mm-hmm. When David Icke talks about seeing the reptiles, or that those people being able to do exercises that creates this force to be seen or to come through, in a reverse mm-hmm. aspect of it, when our knowledge, when our vibration frequency or the acceptance of the word is there at a certain level, we're able to kind of pop up into that realm and see him as he is here.
Yes.
We're dampened by the world,
mm-hmm.
so to speak. Our frequency is dampened. Our light is dampened. But through
mm-hmm.
persevering through faith, that at certain points there will be a rise in that where we're allowed to actually see.
Well, you see, it's the faith aspect of the road to Emmaus is the willingness to walk with Christ. All right. The faith is buttressed by facts, and that's where study the Word of God to approve thyself comes into the equation. We are required to do a bit of intellectual legwork in order to understand the Word. The Word is actually not an emotional entity or something that affects emotions. It's a communicated, intellectual exercise. So faith is buttressed the more time you spend studying these things. With regards to Ike, I'm not fully convinced of all of his statements and so on. I think he's got a basic handle on the mechanics of what's going on. But as to his demarking and labeling and so on, the reptilian races, these kinds of things, I prefer to see it more as Christ has this ability to manifest in two different dimensions. And the reptilian aspect really comes down to, I can turn reptilian myself if I decide to reject all that is righteous and right.
Yes.
And go into a fight or flight mentality where I only think of myself. I subscribe to what he says on...
Yeah, and I should have clarified more. I wanted to use the mechanics aspect of it because I agree with you on that other part of it. The mechanics of his explanation as a process to say that there's some kind of an ability with the mechanics to see into two dimensions and to be seen in two different dimensions, which I think is incredible.
The tragedy is that people like myself and even yourself and so on who have a belief in Christianity, we end up with this particular view of things. We end up having far more in common with the likes of David Icke and even certain New Age thinking than we do with mainstream Christianity.
Isn't it funny? Is it? I mean,
it's phenomenal.
It's wild. It's wild, isn't it? This just came up. Let me ask you too. Does it have anything to do with what the gnosis or a gnosis or another type of knowledge that the Gnostics were talking about? Is that something that's coming into play here? Is there an opening that happens? What? We must have a little delay, so I apologize about that. I just wanted to. It's funny. We're in bed together, almost in a sense, or close to the same bed, and go like, "How is this happening?" That my brothers and sisters in all the churches that I've gone to, that God kept saying, "No, go to another church. Now you've got this church. Now go here. Now go there and see what the similarities are, see what the difference is." To say, "Here I am," and it's like there's so much more in common, an awakening of sorts. It's amazing and confusing to me at the same time.
Yeah, well, David Icke is an example from my own experience. I have the utmost respect that he was able to simply divorce himself from mainstream, thought blocks and be able to see things in a different way.
Yeah.
His nomenclature and his beliefs things, are very different to mine. I also think he suffers very badly from a biblical interpretation that is based on the church's interpretation. I think that's quite often a lot of problems that that I myself come up against. That they judge the word based on what's been interpreted by the Vicar of Rome or the Anglican Church in England or the Baptists or whoever. And I don't blame them when they come back with a very anti-Christian mentality, because in my opinion, all they've done is they've identified what I consider to be the Saturn death cult version of Christianity, with its obsession with eternal torture for individuals that don't toe the line. Just the emphasis on ritual and the personification of Christ rather than the word. If I give you a classic example of the esoteric traditions where this sort of bleed over between these kinds of beliefs of mine comes, is, the saying in esoteric traditions, as above, so below.
Yes.
I've always been fascinated. I've never, and I'd be really appreciative if you or one of your listeners tracks this down. I found it very difficult. But many years ago, I had heard that when you look at Christianity, there is this talk, particularly with Paul and so on, of a metamorphosis taking place with those who are, selected or make the grade, so to speak, to rule with Christ in that period called the Tabernacles Kingdom, that time immediately after his return. So this metamorphosis, this changing in the twinkling of an eye, has fascinated people for many years. And in nature, we one particular example of that, and that would have to be the metamorphosis that takes place with a caterpillar into a butterfly. I was very, very interested to find out that science had actually identified and isolated a growth hormone that exists in caterpillars that is triggered, that produces the metamorphosis effect. They don't understand its full mechanics, but they know what its trigger is. But the astounding thing that I had heard, and this is what I've never been able to confirm, is that this triggering of this growth hormone, all right, is in fact not a result of environmental factors or genetic sort of programming or anything. They had actually worked out that there was actually a signal from the caterpillar's brain that triggers the growth hormone. So it's not an instinctual thing. It's actually, this was what pricked my ears up in terms of what I'd heard and saying and need to have confirmed. It was as if the caterpillar understood something in order to be able to trigger the growth hormone that metamorphosized into a butterfly. Now, what was astounding even further about that is there is only one other species on the planet that has the same growth hormone, and that is humans. And through the life of humans, all right, it's this growth hormone that exists in our thorax, and for the life of humans, this is never triggered. We never have it triggered. Now, you know, this could be a total wild goose chase on my part, on the part of the people. And I've never really taken the time to really research it or anything. But if I could confirm that story as I've told it, but there is a general understanding it is not a genetic trigger or a environmental trigger. It's quite literally an intellectual trigger that triggers the growth hormone in caterpillars. And we have that same hormone. I would be extremely interested because that relates back to it being a matter of the understanding of the word as a trigger for a similar process to take place.
That's incredible. There are a lot of people that I know probably between my Facebook and my list that would have access to that. I'm thinking of one guy right now who's a government scientist who's into a lot of this that I could ask the question to. If you could send me any kind of references that you do have to even get to that part, if that, or if you just heard it by a story, that's fine. I can work on it past that.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea.
Oh, I think it's an incredible idea, and what kept resonating in me was that Oscar kept saying something about the sound of God, the bell. That's why he used to hit the anvil with the hammer, because it resonated. Mm-hmm. It sent it out there, and it couldn't be stopped. It was a certain frequency that would trigger things to happen. There's other people that get into sound therapy and different things, but that's all me speculating at this point. And I would, how powerful would that be if that knowledge is correct? You know, I would say if the Saturn death cult knows that exists, they're sure going to make sure that is quiet. And
yeah, of course it is. If in fact it is an intellectual trigger, it's literally, you know, you need the key to the cipher to trigger it. Where would that come from? That's obviously from a Christian perspective. If I'm on the right track here, it would be something within the Word that would produce that trigger. It would be arriving at an understanding of the Word as given that would result in a similar thing. That's the implication anyway.
Well, the implications there, let me ask you personally, what do you think? What do you think it might be?
Well, actually, it goes back to that question, so what is that higher force that might be, you know, through guiding, and I started down the track that Christ himself is invisible in this world but active, as we discussed earlier. However, there is also within Christian thinking, there is what's called the Holy Spirit, the Holy Ghost, according to Catholics and so on. And the way I understand Holy Ghost or Holy Spirit is that it is the power of God, or the fuel that is supplied by God through whatever mechanism in order to bring you to a certain consciousness. Now, my understanding of this is that as individuals and even as national entities, we have to undergo a certain process by which we come into our inheritance in the way that Christ came into his inheritance, implicit in the statement, "This is my Son in whom I am well pleased." And while we are the children of God at this particular stage, the end game from a biblical point of view is to become the brother of God. It includes women and men together and so on, as far as I can work out. But the idea is that you become equal with he who was the first. All right? And what you're doing is that you are entering into a contractual arrangement in the same way that the old biblical law of inheritance, as practiced down through the centuries until recently, was when a son reached a certain stage in their development, and it had nothing to do with on 21 years of age, bang, you got it, or anything.
Yeah.
But a father, when he felt that the son was ready to take over the business of the family and to take on the responsibilities, gave the son the right to sign in his own name. Sorry, in the father's name. So
yes.
that if you reach the point where the father trusted that the son now had experienced enough that he thinks in the same way as the father. So that if he has to make a decision on the part of the family and the father is not there to do it as such, the father can trust him to make the decision based on the same thought patterns, the same lines. And this brings us all the way back to God's law as a schoolmaster for gaining that acceptance. And the life we lead on now on this planet in the Christian terms and so on, it doesn't guarantee our salvation. Salvation is a gift, and I don't want to get into that debate with people. But in terms of the inheritance, to be the thing that Paul talked about, the crown of righteousness, that he trained like a boxer to achieve, constantly refining his training, in the Word of God. Yes. That crown of righteousness will be bestowed when on those that God knows think the same way, and not only think the same way, but, and this is key to it, agree with the way that God expects things to be done. All right? And that's, in essence, thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart. The word love coming from the Hebrew word leb, which basically means to understand and agree with, that kind of love, rather than emotional types of love. It's absolutely key for Christians to understand that you can come to salvation, you have been redeemed, but you have to do what Christ did after the cross, and that is rise and move on from it. You can't get stuck at the cross and think that's the be-all of the equation. There is something that you have to do. You have to build a life in the model of Christ, and you're never going to achieve it in the same way. God doesn't expect that of you. He expects you to simply try it with all your heart and all your mind. And even if Christ built a wonderful mansion, all you can handle is a rickety old barn somewhere and so on because you got the instructions wrong and all that. It's the effort and the desire to do things as God would want and your agreement with him that then says, basically, you've done a great job. I'm very happy with how it's gone. I now enter into a contract with you where you are my son and are able to rule with my authority, as a son would do when he comes to sign, be able to sign with his father's, with the same authority of his father's signature here on this earth. Does that make sense in terms of the...
Yeah, it seems to go past the level of where I learned about pisteo or pistis, where the idea of to test it, not just to walk up to the bridge and know that the bridge can hold your weight. No, walk up to the bridge and let it hold your weight. Proceed with the knowledge, not just that it works like that, but walk on it. Not just believe it, but walk on it like you believe it, and test it.
Right. Yeah, and this comes down to the idea that the Christian needs to attain a point where the faith aspect comes into the equation, and that is that if God wills it, I live. If God wills it, I die. And in those circumstances, my faith is that it's all in accordance with his plan, all in accordance with his righteousness, and that his righteousness righteousness ultimately leads to the restitution of all creation into a perfect balance with God's law. I mean, that's, the doctrine of the restitution of all things that I'm spouting there. But that's the faith aspect that I have. However, I am somebody who is very interested on how that bridge is created and what laws go into it. And I'm very interested in getting myself to a position where I could build my own bridge and have faith that it will stand and not let me down. That's my own personal approach to these things.
It's pretty amazing, you keep going and there's something that keeps you going, and then the knowledge starts to fill in and the pieces of the puzzle kind of go into place and say, okay, and maybe if you're off a little bit, that it kind of nudges you back in another direction. So in that regard, I was going to ask you this on the interview. I want to ask it to you personally. What do you recommend then? You've got some ideas about the Sabbath and the tithe, the first, the second tithe, and giving your best first fruits and things like that. What is there a book, or are you thinking about writing a book to say preparation for the Jubilee or preparation for this shifting and changing of minds to be able to say, okay, on a dime or close to on a dime, okay, I've been living in this system, boom, I'm ready to just go and live in another system and to go with it in that direction, wherever it takes you.
Well, there are people come to the same sort of understanding of God's law and its conflict with the Babylonian system as myself, but where I differ from a lot of them is I have a very passive attitude towards those who perpetrate the Babylonian system, simply because, like Nebuchadnezzar was a tool, a vessel of God in correcting the kingdom of Judah at that time, there is a reason that we have been placed under this yoke that is Babylon. To be perfectly honest, the sovereignty that I place on God is they had no other choice other than this was going to happen. It was going to, the consequences were set in motion, and this was something we were going to experience. And so subsequently, I believe that living under the Babylonian system is something that one is supposed to do in the way that the prophet Daniel had to live under the Babylonian system in the time of Babylon. And the story there, of course, is that he was tried and tested, chucked into the lion's den and so on, because he wouldn't compromise his basic beliefs. He wouldn't indulge in a interest-bearing system. He wouldn't put his faith in an interest-bearing system or in the gods of Babylon. Yet he served, as was expected of him, the leaders of Babylon. He paid due deference to them. However, when they fell, he recognized it for what it was in God's plan. And I think that's where you go on to what happens in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, to look at their example, that they are observing Persian law in going about trying to reestablish the principles under which, not to put it out of context, under which a Christian can live. Because, as far as I'm concerned, they were Christians. They believed in the Messiah to come. I believe in the Messiah who has come.
Yes.
But we believe in the same individual. So these Christians, for want of a better label, were in the process of learning what it was to build the temple. It's a very metaphorical thing. The temple is made of living bricks in this day and age. We can take as an example that when the opportunity presents itself and we are no longer under and have been released by other powers from a Babylonian system, then it's up to us to build this living temple. And this living temple is basically people willing to observe God's laws. And as I said before, it starts with observing a Sabbath. Once you get that down, it all starts to fall into place. It becomes a little bit easier to go from one part to another. But yeah, I don't see a revolution in which the righteous Christians rise up and strike down the oppressive Babylonians and all that sort of stuff. I leave that to God in whatever form he manifests himself. And I believe that fight is there. I believe I have more than enough on my plate fighting the urge to live a carnal life, indulge in things that are offered in what I call the Babylonian system and such. I got to get that sorted out. in my own life before I can start saying to people, hey, this is what we should do, this is what you should do. All we can do in the meantime is discuss what options are there.
Yeah, that's really powerful to me too, because I feel like sometimes, as a lot of New Agers do, they want to go out and change the world, but their personal life is a mess, and it's like, how do you go out and
Yeah,
change the world? Well, sometimes you're still fighting your own battle. Maybe that's part of the deal, that I'm not trusting in God and His plan enough to say it's going to come to fruition. But at the same time, it's the idea of the evil goes throughout the world because good men do nothing. I get
right.
kind of caught up in that thing back and forth to say, wow, are you saying that by observing the Sabbath and by doing that, that's good men doing something, and that allows the Spirit or the essence of God to come in and change the system, or are we just going to go through it anyways?
Well, Proverbs tells us, get wisdom before you get anything, get wisdom. Wisdom comes from study of the Word and coming to an understanding of basically how God does things. From there, being capable of answering questions when they come your way rather than proselytizing. This is what we have to prepare for. If we are people who say that the current financial system is rubbish, is oppressive, and so on, needs to be changed, it's incumbent on us to have another system, a viable system for people to implement if they so choose. Now, God's given us plenty of ways to live in a system while not succumbing to a system. And I point to a much maligned law which says you cannot lend interest, you cannot receive interest, but to the foreigner, you can lend interest to it, okay? When I did my interview with Henrik, he kind of threw me on that one, and I sent an email once I thought about it. It didn't quite come to hand at the time. When you look at that particular law, the word stranger, there is a word called nokri, and it does not mean a stranger who lives within the borders of Israel or within the borders of the system operating under God. And so subsequently, the nokri, you're not allowed to lend interest to a stranger who is not nokri, a stranger who is a guest within the country, and they are not allowed to engage in interest. But to the stranger who exists under the jurisdiction of some political entity or kingdom that practices usury, you have the right to give them interest, because what you are not allowing them to do, if you think about this, somebody from a system like that who knows that they can take a loan at interest will engage in a carry trade. They will come through, they will take a loan at non-interest from you, then they will use that money and go and lend it at interest to somebody else within their system. So what God essentially does is He stops that crap from taking place by making it impossible for somebody who has no intention observing God's laws or of observing interest-free stuff and is only looking to benefit themselves through this type of a carry trade. It stops the carry trade dead in its tracks for those. That's essentially it. And if you earn interest from somebody who does that, well, that's the consequences of their own fault, because you are lending to somebody outside who has no intention of following the system as it is. So when I struggled with this for a long time, Mark. How do I hold a bank account? How do I deal with my day-to-day life within the Babylonian financial system I've identified? I'm still receiving interest. Oh, that's terrible. I've got to do something about it. I went so far as once to say to a bank, I don't want your interest. And they said, sorry, we've got to do it. And then I thought, okay, so I'll just simply calculate how much interest and I'll give it away. And then I thought, no, this is just skirting around the problem and so on like that. And then it suddenly came to me, it's perfectly fine if the Western financial system insists that, and I'm going to use this term, insists that I take the mark of the beast to buy and sell to buy and sell and such, then I am covered under God's law in terms of lending them my money that they can lend out at interest. I'm covered by God's law, and He makes it possible for me to live under that system while deferring respect, or not respect, but, as God says, respect those who are put in charge, because I have put them in charge. Irrespective of what we think of those people, there's a reason that exists, but Now I know how to live under that system without feeling dreadful about the thing, and I'm prepared that should the system revert to a non-interest system, I'm all for it. I don't go through a crisis of, how am I going to live without interest or something like that.
Yeah, that your millions aren't going to be making enough to sustain yourself without going into the principal, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, well, the capitalist ideal in the West as we have it and so on. Look, there are things that people can do. I've contemplated, when I was in Britain, there are enough Islamic banking institutions for me to operate money at interest-free, and I would be perfectly happy to move into that. But at the same time, I'm very wary of yoking myself to an unbeliever.
Yeah.
In terms of that. So I just sit there, building my knowledge, maintaining my faith, doing what I do through writing Saturn Death Cult, talking with people such as yourself, trying to put across whatever might be useful in terms of other people building their knowledge. And I have an implicit faith that if only 10% of what I say is true, that 10% will reach those who are meant to receive it. Do you see what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah. Well, I could just tell you from personal experience. Your whole interview was incredible. There were certain points, though, that went so like a shot so deep and so thorough into me that it began changing my paradigm. This call is just a continued procession of it where we're going forward. And then as I speak to people, whatever part of it I can remember or gather or bring into the work that I'm doing to then go outward. So, I truly believe and know personally that's happening and will continue to happen.
Yeah. Well, I see this as the truth behind the miracle of Pentecost. It's not that people understood foreign languages. It's that they understood the underlying message, no matter what their language was. That's what brought them. And I think we are going to go through a very intense Pentecostal moment in that sense. Again, a lot of people don't realize that Pentecost didn't just start at the disciples in the New Testament. The first event of Pentecost was at Mount Sinai with the tribes of Israel. And what we read there is that they all started to speak with one voice in agreement with God. That was the essential idea behind Pentecost. But what they did was they balked at the idea that with one voice they could speak. They were all in agreement, which put them into direct contact with God. And they balked and they said, no, Moses, you go and talk with God and then come and tell us what to do. And that was the difference between that Pentecostal moment and what happened in the above room with the apostles and the disciples.
Yes.
That they accepted on the behalf of Christians that we would now be able to talk to God directly. And of course, in my opinion, talking to God directly extends to reading His Word. That's probably the most effective way. Reading His Word, discussing it, and analyzing, testing it,
So you feel like the Word of God, because I've had some doubt recently in the last few years where about the interference in the Bible from different entities, kings, people that could write where the majority couldn't write. That's been a stumbling block for me, so to speak. The Word of God, but is there, people pointing out mistakes and things in time or whatever,
Sure.
And to go like, wow, is this been really infused or has it really been hijacked by man? And how do you feel on that?
Well, I quote that the Bible itself has passages that completely admit that this has been going on. Jeremiah is one particular guy. I can't give you the exact reference, but he talks about the changing of Scripture, the changing of words. And, of course, he was talking about the Pentateuch books at that time because, the book of Jeremiah didn't exist at the time of Jeremiah and such. So it's an ongoing process. But you see, this is when you look deep into understanding what is meant by the Word, this idea, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was made flesh, which of course we identify as being Christ and the life that He lived. When you look deeply into trying to find what is the truth, and you come up against this possibility of corrupted Scripture, it seems almost an impossible exercise to find any truth, because somebody can always point and say, but how do you know that translation translation is accurate and all this sort of stuff, okay?
Yeah.
So that's where it becomes exceedingly important to take into account, again, a biblical passage that says, by the sure word of prophecy will you know that I am true. Okay? Now, prophecy is often simply confused with prognosticating events before they happen. But prophecy in its true meaning is the interpretation of the Word of God. And all I can work out is that there is such a profound interpretation of the Word done by prophets that they have such a great grasp on consequences for acts going down through centuries, and they're onward, and this is what I alluded to with the echoing effect of prophecy, that they have such a great grasp of the consequences of actions in either agreeing or disagreeing with the original word, that they are able to give us basically a timeline, an outline of events as they take place. Again, in religion terms, this is quite unique to the Bible, this reliance on saying, this is how it's going to be, this is when it's going to happen, this is who's going to be the players involved, and so on. And of course, we know that this has become an obsession for many people in trying to interpret the book of Revelations, as they call it, evangelical interpretations, futurist interpretations of the book of Daniel and other prophecies, Gog and Magog from Ezekiel and all that sort of stuff. It becomes almost like an exercise of, go on, tell my future, and such, all right? When, in fact, all it is confirmation that when you see these things happening, they are the result of these rebellions against the Word of God. Hence, by the sure word of prophecy, will you know that I am true? And of course, when we're talking about what is true about God, they come back to that whole idea. Surely it's expressed through his idea of law, the thing that binds us in how we talk to people and so on, okay? So I start with the law and the legal interpretation, all the things that go into contracts. Then that gives me the key to understanding these seemingly, what could you say, these fantastical verses in Revelation, these surreal, psychedelic episodes that seem to pop up in the Bible. When you look at that from a legal perspective, they really do actually make a tremendous amount of sense from that perspective. And then it is just quite simply a matter of delving into the history books and basically watching today's headlines.
Wow. Yeah, bringing the law back into it is kind of like lining up the bottom part and the top part of a telescope, where it's like it'll always bring it back into focus. And if it's not within that focus, then it's not something you're probably going to pay attention to.
Well, it's one of those things that I've spoken about in terms of it's at the basis of understanding what is meant by in the beginning was the Word and the Word was made flesh. And one of the curious things that we have about Christ is there are no physical descriptions of Christ in any part of the Bible. You have copious amounts of people claiming to have been in his presence and all that sort of stuff, but none of them give a physical. We don't know what color hair he had or anything along those lines. Now, there is a very, very good reason for that. Okay, and basically the famous messianic prophecy of Isaiah, which predicts the type of person the Messiah would be, is extremely revealing in the second verse of 53. I'm just going to read from it here.
Please, yes.
Where it talks, for he shall, talking of the Messiah, for he shall grow up before him, that him being God, before him as a tender plant and as a root out of the dry ground. He hath no form or comeliness, meaning he has no description, and he ain't a handsome guy. All right? There's nothing attractive about him. And when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. Now, there is a particular reason for that, because the modern personality cult that says, hey, that's a good-looking guy, I'll vote for him. Hey, that girl is absolutely amazing, I'll vote for her, or whatever it is, comes into it. Right at the very beginning, there was a distinct reason for God or the scriptures to keep Christ's looks and physical form out of the equation. All right? And the reason for that is so that we could concentrate on his words, because all he was a shell. The body of Christ was a shell that embodied or encapsulated what was in the word. And the way that that is expressed, or the word, it's not like he then sits down and spouts out words like a tape recording from something that's been programmed into it. It comes through how he lives. So his life, his actions, the way of going about in the material world are expressions of the word. There is nothing that comes in the record to us in Christ and what he does that has there's nothing frivolous. What I'm saying is that there's a reason for everything that is reported, because essentially his actions become the word, because he embodies the word. And the word, the logos, as the Greek say it means the idea. Okay?
Gotcha.
All right, so that's what the word is. It's the original idea. And when we go back to Saturn Death Cult stuff and Saturn Death Cult, the book, I argue this in a very obtuse way, but what I point to is that the Hebrew experiment encapsulated in Exodus and so on, what they're looking back on is this idea that events in the heavens, and they are reported in the Bible. Velikovsky went to great lengths to show that the Exodus and so on is very much related to planetary problems and encounters and such. But this is not important to the Hebrew. What's important to the Hebrew is the idea behind those events that set them in motion.
Say that one more time, that last part. What's important is the idea that set the events in motion. From the Hebrew,
the
did you say?
idea behind, the Hebrew concept is that God, the planets are not God, all right, or not even God's. God is not manipulating them in real time, so to speak. Like a video game or something like that. The Hebrew concept goes to the idea that the original idea is what set everything in motion to be at its appointed place and time, including planets, including flaring Saturns, including cataclysms on the Earth, including Towers of Babel. The original idea is behind that. So God is the idea, and to go incredibly metaphysical, to reek of metaphysics here, the idea is the origin of energy. Never confuse motion with energy, but an idea becomes the most powerful form of energy there is in the universe, and the idea that is the word qualifies of God simply because it is the first cause for everything that comes after.
Wow, that's huge. It's overwhelming almost.
It disembodies God from this idea of an entity. All right, and it really truly gets to the idea of the omnipotence of God. And I've discussed in other interviews the mechanism I can see for omnipotence and electric universe principles. But the point is that when God is eventually, that whole idea, this is distilled. That whole omnipotent idea from the beginning is distilled into one man called Jesus Christ, whose life then represents what that idea essentially is working towards, and he becomes the first glimpse of that we have of where that idea is taking us.
So it's almost as if everything that we're seeing in the heavens, everything we talked about, everything you're talking about, everything Velikovsky talked about, the essence of that is in Christ and in man. It's watching the envelopment and the trajectory, so to speak, even though there isn't a trajectory, of what happens with that idea.
Yeah. All I'm simply saying is that all events are the original energy put into motion, okay, including your life, my life, and actually also including Jesus Christ's life. It's just that the original idea that set energy into motion all right, or the idea that was energy that then went into motion, is
Yes.
is moving towards a fulfillment, a point of completion, all right, and that as we go towards that, events happen and so on that lead to. I might be sort of wandering a little bit here, but I'm just simply saying that Christ becomes the first example of where that ideal has planned for all of creation to go to.
Is that where you will do greater qualitatively and quantitatively? Is that in there somewhere?
Yeah, you're talking about the statement to the apostles. You will go to do even greater things than I have done. Yes, if we believe the acts and so on like that, more people were raised from the dead, and so on. We've reported the more important things that happened, but the power to go on and do that was born out of Christ's ability to become the first to qualify to enter into contract with the Father as a co-signatory. You know what I mean? That whole idea we were talking about, the ability to rule in His name. Now, it's not, for most people, there would be people out there who are Christians who would say, sorry, God is God and Christ is God, and that's the end of the story. No, Christ says, I am the first of many brethren. And so the implicit argument there is that there is an ongoing process that has, in human terms, many, many thousands of years still to run, where all of creation, and particularly humanity itself, will be brought into this relationship where they have the authority and to, act in God's name as God within creation. And where we go from there, I'll be honest, Mark, it's beyond my finite mind to contemplate what that actually gives you,
Yeah. No, and what you were saying there, kind of what came back up was the Saturn death cult trying to usurp this man.
Totally.
They've got a grasp, or somewhere along the line there was a grasp that this new man of many brethren through Christ, they again want to twist it and make it their own and do it their own way.
And that is essentially it. The Saturn death cult is an attempt to achieve the same objectives, all right, but through the laws of men, through the systems of men. And subsequently it's been nothing more than the source of all our problems since, quite literally, the fall of the Golden Age, that time when the Bible says Adam and Eve were chucked out of the garden, and other cultures, mythologies talk about the loss of this time when God walked amongst us. Of course, they call him Saturn or Cronus or Quetzalcoatl or whatever. But the principle is exactly the same. Saturn death cult is man's usurpation of the idea, the word, for where to determine where we're going to go.